Hey guys, welcome back to Willpower Garage. Today I've got a 2013 Audi A4 Quarttro with a 2-liter TFSI motor. Pretty sure timing chain tensioner decided to go out to lunch on this. So, customer called me up because they took this car to Audi. Audi told them that the timing has jumped or something. Just cranking the motor, you can hear there's absolutely no compression. These motors are notorious for the timing chain tensioner to fail. There is an updated part on them. Generally before it fails, you will hear some kind of timing chain noise. Unfortunately, the person that was driving this, they said the engine light had come on, it went off, and then when they were driving it just stopped. Had it towed to the dealership. The dealership said the timing chain is done, and it was going to cost them a whole lot of money to repair. When I spoke to them, I basically laid out what is probably going to be, what probably is going to need to be done. Obviously, I'm going to start by getting this thing in service position. I'm going to pull off the front timing cover, and we're going to see if indeed that tensioner did let go. If that is the case, we're going to have to pull the cylinder head because more likely than not has bent valves. There's a couple of options there depending on the damage on the engine and on the cylinder head. We might be able to rebuild the cylinder head, just have to replace the valves. This is so common that companies like ECS Tuning sell timing chain, I forget what they call it, timing tensioner repair kit, something along those lines, where it literally comes with the chains, the tensioner, and the cylinder head. Just to give you guys an idea, I believe that kit is something like $2,100 or $2,200 just for those parts. Obviously, there's a decent amount of labor to get to that point, but we're going to take this piece by piece. I'm going to try to do this as affordably yet correctly as I can. Alright guys, as you can see, that is service position. You can see I left the impact bumper on. But having the headlights off did make it much easier. I have done this in the past with the headlights on, but like I said, I'm always fighting with the fender and the way it's coming up and out. For the few seconds really it took me to get the headlight off, it's well worth it. From here I'm going to start taking the front of the motor stuff off. Obviously the serpentine belt, the electrical connections, get this pipe kind of loosened out of the way, get my balancer off, and take off my lower cover and my upper cover so I could see what the timing chain situation is. So I just wanted to point out the timing chain, checking your timing chain for chain stretch, because that's basically what has caused this engine to fail. Audi and Volkswagen both put a plug in the front of the timing cover. It's an inspection hole. Behind this is the timing chain tensioner. Like I said in the beginning of the video, there are an updated version. This happens to be the updated version of that tensioner. So what I think caused our issue here is my guide here. I don't know if it shows up on camera. It's not really showing up. A little light on here. So my guide here is broken. I don't know if that's a result of you know, the tensioner being overextended or just wear in the guides. I'm sure once I get these chains off, I'll be able to show that the guides are heavily worn, and that's what contributes to this chain stretch issue. I'm sure if you're at this point or even looking at this video, you have some kind of P code that's indicating that your timing is off, and that is because of chain stretch. There is a way to check it if your engine's still running, obviously, with the scan tool and a measure value block, and it'll give you a percentage that the cam sensors and the crank sensor relay to each other, and you know, if you're within certain specs, your chain is okay. If you're out of those specs, it's probably a good idea to remove everything, replace your chain, replace your tensioners, and do that before you have a catastrophic failure like this is. Top dead center mark is not the top arrow you see here. It's actually, it might be a little hard to see, it's a mark right about here on the timing cover. It kind of points to the edge of the timing cover where it meets the oil pan. So when you go to set your balancer, you want to make sure that the notch on the balancer points to this mark here and not the mark up top. As for the marks on the cams, on the intake camshaft, there is an arrow here, and on the exhaust you have this line here. My tensioner was completely out, so my timing was off. I couldn't even crank the motor. The valve timing was off to the point where the pistons were hitting the valves. So I went ahead and I got this thing back in time just to make sure I can rotate things. And just from rotating it by hand, I could feel that this engine has absolutely no compression. So from this point, I'm going to remove the cylinder head, and I'm going to inspect to see which valves are damaged and pretty much take it from there. If you are going to replace this timing chain, there is a special tool to remove the gosh, I forgot what this is called. It's not necessarily a bolt. It is part of the cam adjuster here. I forget what it is called exactly. There's a couple, actually I think there's two different tool numbers. One has pins that are directly across from each other. As you can see, this one is offset. Let me see if I can get a light on there for you guys. You can see the holes are offset. You will need that special tool to remove that bolt. Audi does also show special tools that once this, I'm going to call it a girdle, comes off, there are special tools. They look like almost hook feet that lock the camshaft sprockets, so that you can get this thing timed right, get the chain on. It makes things a little easier. I've done these jobs in the past. I've never needed them. It's a little tricky to make sure you get, you know, your cams in position without them jumping. Again, you don't want them to jump because you can damage the valves. But yeah, keep in mind you will need this tool to do this job. All right, so from here, I'm going to start taking things apart. Okay guys, I just wanted to show you the special tool you need to remove the cam adjusting bolt. There are two versions of this. The number is the same, the difference is the /2/1. I believe this is the /2, but I'll put in the description the actual tool number. This is one I've made myself, just so I have, but you can rent these, you can buy them. They're relatively inexpensive, but you will need this to remove that bolt. Another thing I should mention, that bolt there is left-handed thread. So to remove it, you need to turn it clockwise. So it's a righty-loosey, lefty-tighty bolt. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove that bolt, the other support bolt for the cam bridge, remove the cam bridge. All right, there's the adjuster bolt. Just like I said here, you can see a little better there the offset of the pins. The other tool number has them pretty much in the same plane, but this one is offset. Seems like most of the Audis that I take apart have it offset. A lot of the Volkswagens are in a line. I don't know if it's particular to manufacturer or what. I mean, they're pretty much the same engines, or just, you know, the engine code itself. But that's it. So I'm going to continue to remove the rest of this bridge off and update you guys soon. Okay, another thing I should probably point out, in the cam bridge here is a screen. There it goes, now it's focusing. This screen a lot of times will get clogged and or blown out, and you can see this one is blown out. So when you have this thing off, be mindful of that screen. A lot of times it gets stuck in the hole, the oil galley hole here. So make sure you pull that out when you have this thing off, depending on, you know, if you have a damaged cylinder head like this, or your timing chain, doing a timing chain job. Just be mindful, remove that screen. You don't want to fall into the oil pan. It's so small it won't do any real damage, but just be mindful of that screen. It's not really a big deal to put it back in without it, so don't worry about it. Replacing this cam bridge is relatively expensive, but these are pretty notorious for blowing out the screens like this. Okay, so I have my cylinder head back in place. Everything is back where it needs to be. So now I need to set my timing. Since I had everything off and had the cylinder head off and had to reinstall it, I had my crankshaft set so it wasn't at top dead center when I reinstalled the cylinder head. So I need to turn my crankshaft so it lines up with the timing mark that's down here. This is the timing mark for the 2-liter engine. Don't go by the arrow that's on top. This is not correct. I don't know what it's for, but there's the marks on your balancer. You're going to line it up with this guy here, and that's pretty much initially what you're going to do to start your timing process. Now my camshafts are basically in their top dead center placement. I will probably have to move them around a little bit, especially once I put my my retaining tools in there. But I just wanted to point out right now that you need to set your timing. Make sure your timing on your crankshaft is set to top dead center. So just like that. Timing marks pointing over here, and now you're ready to start timing. Okay, so there's a few timing marks here that you need to familiarize yourself with. And what I like to use is I have a little paint pen to mark up those marks so you can see them better once it comes to installation. So on the crankshaft is the arrow for your balance shaft chain. And then there's also on the water pump drive shaft here, on it itself has a single dot, and then on this little idler sprocket there are 2 dots. So you want to put the single dot in between the 2 dots there. And let's see if I can't. This is the single dot. And it's a little hard to see, but these are the 2 teeth where that needs to line up there. And then this is your timing mark for your balance shaft. So I'm going to grab the stuff, the chain, the guides, and the tensioner that goes here, and I will show you guys how to line all that stuff up there. Alright, so real quick, I just wanted to show you guys, here's a picture representation of the sprockets. So you can see the 3 dots where the arrow is pointing to. Those are the 3 dots that you want to line up for that water pump sprocket. And just the mark I showed you there that's on the balance shaft, as well as the mark that's on the crankshaft sprocket. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to line up your painted marks on your chain with these marks here. Oh yeah, see, should point that one out as well. Here on that sprocket, there's where the mark is on that sprocket as well. So basically you're gonna line up your chain with all your marks on there, and then you're gonna go through and install your guide rails and your tensioner. Again, as always, I'll put in the description the torque specs for all of this stuff. But I just wanted to show you guys the timing marks themselves, because it's a little easier to see what they're talking about with the 3 dots there. I wanted to make mention real quick, the crankshaft sprocket here. As you can see, there's a flat spot on the crankshaft, and then there's a flat spot on the sprocket as well. You need to make sure that this thing keys in the right way and it sits flat. Make sure it's in all the way. There is a special tool. Basically, it's just the bolt that goes through it to hold this to the crankshaft. Because if this thing comes out a little bit and say you reinstall everything there, your timing's going to be off. And believe me, I've done that before. So you want to make sure this thing is sitting in the flat spot of the crankshaft. It's sitting flat all the way against it. And then, like I said, I'll usually use just the balancer bolt through here just to keep this in the whole time, because you can leave everything there. You can reinstall your timing cover to the back, and then when you're ready, put your balancer on, put your bolt back on, and everything should be okay. But you still have to be very careful with this. You don't want it to move around. Okay, so my chain is in place. My marks are on, all of the marks on the sprockets there. Obviously there's a guide up here, tensioner here, and another guide that sits here. I did want to mention that I clean these holes out with brake clean, blow them out till they're dry. Same with the bolts. You want to clean all the grease and oil off of them, blow them dry. And then I like to put Loctite on here, blue Loctite, on all the bolts before I torque these down to spec. So I'm going to get all the guides on here, the tensioner, everything, and when I come back I'll tell you guys what the torque spec is for this. Okay, so I have all the guides and the tensioner lever in place. All what is it, 5 of these bolts here, even though this one's a little bigger, they're all 20 Newton meters. So torque those down. Like I said, I put a little blue Loctite on all of those. So I'm going to torque these down, and then I'm going to push in or thread in my new tensioner. The tensioner here, besides being a very large bolt, I'm using an 1 1/16 chrome socket because you need the clearance to fit in here. This gets torqued down to 80 Newton meters. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain how we're going to put the main camshaft timing chain on. There are a few little steps, and I'll go and I'll show you some of them from the program itself that shows some of the other details. Now I've got my cam holding tools. These are the ones I made. I'm pretty sure you can buy these. They're relatively inexpensive. But they do come in handy to hold the camshafts where you need them. I have done this job a few times without these tools. It is possible. You know, it's just something that makes it a little bit easier. Now, I've got my marks painted on all my sprockets there. The crank, that's the mark, and I marked the tooth for the main, the crankshaft sprocket there. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to lay the timing chain over the intake and exhaust sprockets here, and then we're going to bring it so the timing mark lines up down here with the crankshaft. I'm going to install the guide rail that's on this side of the motor, and then we're going to install the top guide rail here. Once you have that and all your marks are lined up, we can release this holding tool. Basically just slide it back, install the guide rail, the tensioner rail, excuse me, on this side, and then you know, we should be able to release the tensioner. Everything should be timed. So let me go to the program. I'll try to show you guys in the pictures a little bit better. Maybe it'll clarify it a bit. Okay, so real quick on the program, this gives you a pretty good overview showing all the timing marks there, the crankshaft, the exhaust, and the intake sprockets. Basically, you're going to line up your colored links with all of those marks. Once that's on, you're going to install the guide rail here, and you're going to tighten those two bolts up. I'm going to assume those are 20 Newton meters as well, since they're the same bolts as we used for the balance shaft. Once that's on, you can install your new upper guide, and then this is where it talks about there's two different versions. If you have wrench clearance, or if you have just the sprocket with the holes. Let me see if I can show it. There you go. This is more like what I have. Basically what they're saying is you just want to turn the exhaust camshaft just a little bit so you can back off the cam hold tool, and then you can install your tensioner rail, and pretty much this thing is in time then. You can remove your intake hold tool, and then once everything is there, verify all your timing marks. You can probably then release your tensioner, and everything should be in time. So I've got my guide rail in, tightened the bolts 20 Newton meters. I installed the upper guide rail, and then once I had this one in, I removed my holding tool from the exhaust camshaft, and I installed the tensioner guide rail here. Same 20 Newton meters for that bolt. So now just want to verify, make sure all your colored links are lined up with your timing marks. Let me see if I can get a little light on there. See, I got that one on the crankshaft is all lined up. So everything now should be in time. So at this point we can release our hydraulic tensioner, and a good thing to do at this point after you remove the holding tool is rotate the engine twice, make sure everything moves freely as it should, nothing's binding. If it's binding, you better go back and check, make sure your timing is correct, don't try to force it. But from here I'm going to take my tool off, release my tensioner, I'm going to rotate the engine, make sure everything is good, and then when we come back I'm going to show you how to install the cam girdle, cam bridge, whatever you want to call it, and then followed by the covers. Alright guys, so real quick I just wanted to show you the image of the cam bridge and the tightening sequence for these. So bolts 1 through 6 get tightened down to 9 Newton meters, and bolt 7 depends on the size. So if it's an M6, 8 Newton meters. If it's an M8, it gets pre-tensioned to 20 Newton meters. Either or, both get an additional 90-degree turn once it's tightened. So I just wanted to point that out before I install the cam bridge there. I also noticed here, here's a picture showing that lower crankshaft sprocket, and it shows you guys the arrows that I was talking about, or the flat spots the arrows are pointing to, that need to line up when you install that sprocket. So it's very important that that is in the right spot for your timing to all be accurate. So let me grab my cam bridge and I'm going to start installing it. Okay, here's my cam bridge. A couple of things to point out. In here, this is a bearing surface. The cam is actually riding in there. So you want to make sure that there's lubricant on both cam sprockets here where they're going to slip into this. Keep in mind these are machine surfaces, so this thing needs to be installed straight and even. If it's even slightly cocked, it's going to bind up. Don't force it, you'll damage these bearing surfaces. Pull it back, reset, and get it. It should slide on nice and straight. The other thing to point out, this pin here lines up with the guide rail here. Okay? And I also mentioned when I was taking this apart, the screen that is in this cam bridge, a lot of times they blow out. So make sure that it's not in any of the oil galleys on the cylinder head. It's not a big deal if it's missing. If you're really worried about it, you have to replace this whole assembly. You can't buy just that screen. I usually just tear them out, make sure everything is nice and clean, and then just reinstall it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put a little lubricant, my lubricant of choice here, some assembly lube, because it's going to be a little while before I fire this thing up. Not to mention, I had the entire thing apart, so it's going to take a little while to get oil to some of the critical areas, and I don't want a dry start. So let me lube everything up and then start installing this thing. All right, so that's pretty much the basis of installing the cam bridge there. I had a little bit of difficulty getting mine sort of lined up just because the pin was hitting the guide rail, but it was nothing more than sort of just pushing this thing where I needed to go, and then everything sat down just fine. Wanted to point out too, I don't know if I mentioned, installing the oil pump chain. There are no timing marks on that. You do not have to worry about timing marks at all. Just get it looped back over the crankshaft, and then same thing, I put a little Loctite on that bolt, tighten it down 9 Newton meters, and then pull the pin out that tensions the oil pump chain. One other thing I should mention, the tensioner itself has this little spring clip here, and what that is for is to keep the tensioner from pushing back in. So when the engine has no oil pressure at all, this thing is just spring loaded. So generally, once the tensioner is released for me and I rotate my engine twice, I'll then set this lock to the furthest back position I can. That way I know the tensioner is not going to go back any further, and it keeps a good tension on the chain, especially for my initial startup. Like I said, everything was taken apart, so I expect to hear quite a bit of noise until everything starts to get oil pressure or oil volume. The one thing I am going to do is I'm going to remove all the coils, and I'm going to crank this thing over a few times to try to get the oil into some of these areas before I really start it up. So at this point, the only thing I need to do before installing my covers is I need to reinstall my adjuster bolt here. I forget what it's called exactly. Remember, these are left-handed threads, so lefty tighty, righty loosey. That even confused me. I'll put in the description the torque for that as well, because off at the top of my head I don't remember what it is. But I'm going to install that. I'm going to tighten it down to its torque specification, and then from there the top cover can be reinstalled with a new seal, or seals I should say. And then I'll quickly show you guys the lower cover and how to apply the sealant, or the proper amount of sealant, to that guy. Keep in mind, I'm going to leave my harmonic balancer bolt here holding that sprocket in place for now. And then once I have the cover on, I'll carefully remove this. Try not to rotate the engine at all. Put my balancer on and tighten that thing up as soon as possible. I want to make sure that that timing is not moving. Everything is seated in perfectly. So let me get this top bolt in, and when I come back I'll show you guys the sealant for the lower cover. Alright guys, before I install this lower cover, there are a couple of pretty interesting things that the program wants you to do. Now my cover has 8 bolts. I know there are 2 different versions of this, but keep that in mind when you're following along here. Now, there's the cover. Like I said, I have 8 bolts in mine. After the sealant is put onto the cover, you have approximately 5 minutes to get this thing on and your bolts tightened down. What they want you to do is tighten bolts 1 through 8 by hand, obviously just to get the covers seated down, and then tighten them 8 Newton meters, followed by an additional 45 degrees for bolts 2 and 3 and 5 and 8. And then after you install your harmonic balancer, come back, bolts 1 and 4, tighten an additional 45 degrees. Why they have you do it like that, I'm not sure, but they also recommend replacing this cover anytime you remove it. I've never done that. I just, when you remove this cover, obviously you're going to bend some of the edges a little bit. Just make sure you hammer those back straight as best as you can. The other thing I want to make mention is on the sealing surface itself, they recommend a 2 to 3 millimeter bead of the same Volkswagen Audi sealant, I should say, for the sealing surfaces. So I'm going to clean my surfaces on both the cover with some brake clean, rag, as well as the engine, and then I'm going to apply my bead of sealant. I'm going to put a little extra in the corners here, for obvious reasons. You're meeting the oil pan with the engine block here, so a little extra in these corners. Not anything excessive, just a little bit extra before we install the cover here. So let me go ahead and cut the tip on my sealant tube and get ready to install this. Okay guys, as you can see, I've got my cover in place. I've got all the bolts that need to be torqued to yield set now, except for bolts 1 and 4. The rest of them, bolts 2, 3, and then 5 through 8 are all pre-tensioned and then torqued to yield to 45 degrees. At this point, I'm ready to install my damper. But keep in mind, like I said earlier, you have to be very careful now while removing this bolt. You don't want that sprocket to fall off because it is keyed into the crankshaft. Once you remove that, there's really nothing holding it into place. The other thing I want to mention is check the damper. Make sure that the seal where the lip seal is going to be riding, there's no big groove or any kind of rust or anything. Just clean that off and put a little lubricant on this thing. You don't want to rip up the new seal before it's installed. Also, be mindful of the larger triangle tooth here that is going to line up with the sprocket that is underneath this cover. So when I remove this bolt, I'm going to set this thing into place. I'm going to turn it back and forth a few times to make sure I am in that groove. Once I'm in there, I'm going to install the bolt into the balancer. Another thing I should point out, this bolt really is supposed to be replaced. There is also an O-ring seal on the back side of this bolt. Make sure you put a little oil on there before you install it. There's also 2 different size bolts depending on which one you have. The torque is a little different. The one I have here is an 8.8. So off the top of my head, I think that's 90 Newton meters followed by a 90-degree turn to tighten this. Now, Audi does make a counter hold tool, which I do not have. It sort of goes into this mount here and then somewhere over there to hold the balance shaft. To hold the balancer while you tighten this thing down. So I'm going to have to get a little creative to be able to torque this and then my torque to yield. But I just wanted to point those few things out. So from here, I'm going to install my balancer and then I'll update you guys where we are. Alright, so last thing, my balancer is on. It is torqued to the specifications. So now all I need to do is tighten my two bolts, number 1 and 4, to their additional 45 degrees. Again, why Audi has you do that, I have no idea. Alright, so from here, all I need to do is reinstall my dipstick tube and pretty much finish reinstalling the rest of the front end of the car. But that's basically what you need to do a timing chain setup on this particular motor. 4-cylinder 2-liter turbo. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward stuff. As long as you follow the sequence to tightening stuff down, you know, using the chains with their marked links, marking your sprockets first, it's really not too bad of a job. Like I said, you can do the job without the two hole tools. I've done it many times. It's just a little tricky and you want to be careful. The intake camshaft in particular wants to, you know, snap back where you have it, where it needs to be timed. So that gets a little tricky. And then some of the weird things like the lower cover, you know, way tightening those bolts. Again, for whatever reason, I'm not sure. So that's pretty much it. All right, guys, I hope I was able to make this somewhat easy to follow. I know there's a lot of steps, and you know, it's sort of worrisome to make sure you have the timing right. I mean, it's a lot of work to get to this point. To do the timing, you want to make sure everything is done correctly. As always, if I missed anything, just leave me a comment below. I'm really quick at answering those comments. If I'm missing information or anything, you know, I have no problem. I'll look it up for you guys and you know, try to update the description or something to try to help you guys out. But that's basically it when it comes to doing the timing chain assembly on this thing. I do want to mention one other thing, that oil pump tensioner. Sometimes the kits don't come with that, and I've had a few where you know, I was replacing because the tensioners were brittle. That's made of the same nylon-ish material, so do yourself a favor, make sure it's in the timing kit that you're purchasing. If it's not, make sure you buy that. It's, I mean, if I remember correctly, it's only about maybe $20–30 for that tensioner. The chain, again, is probably okay. I want to say you're just driving the oil pump, but really it's not a lot of tension on that thing anyway. But it is one thing that I would keep in mind, and if you're going to open it up this far, I would definitely use it. So, like always, thanks for watching, guys. Please, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.